In this movie, I'll introduce you to the Navigator panel, which a lot of people have a tendency to dismiss out of hand. I don't want you to be one of those folks because it's actually a super useful panel, especially for establishing a custom zoom level here inside the full screen mode. And so let's say I want to see the full photographic image as we're seeing it now, complete with this promotional URL. Well, if I press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac, in order to fit the image on screen and center the zoom, notice that I'm seeing the image surrounded by a black pasteboard, and black is the color of the pasteboard in the full screen mode. But let's say I don't want to see the pasteboard, then I press Control+ or Command+ on the Mac, at which point I can still see the URL, but I'm seeing slivers of black over here on the left and right-hand sides of the image. If I zoom in again by pressing Control+, then I can no longer see the URL. And even if I scroll down to it, it's truncated and the image looks wrong and so forth. Well, what I need to do is establish a very specific zoom ratio, and that's something I can do using the Navigator panel. All right, so I'll press the F key in order to switch to the standard screen mode. And then to bring up the Navigator panel, you want to go up to the window menu, and then notice these commands that begin with 3D and end with tool presets. Those are the more than 30 panels that are available to you here inside Photoshop, and they're listed in alphabetical order. So Navigator is going to appear with the other N, Notes, and so go ahead and choose it, and that'll bring up this panel right here. Now I want you to notice how the panels are organized. We've got these right side panels, which in my case are including color and layers, and they are generally speaking expanded. The libraries panel is currently collapsed. Then we have this second column of icons that represent still more panels, including the little Navigator panel here. Now, it doesn't have to be little. You can make it as big as you like by, in my case, I'm dragging the bottom left corner of the panel. And then notice this red boundary. That represents the portion of the image that appears inside the image window. And so if I drag this guy around, you can see that I'm scrolling the image in the background. All right, but I want to better see what I'm doing, so I'll go ahead and reduce the size of my Navigator panel. Now, in addition to just dragging this thing around here, you also have the option of zooming the image by pressing the Control key. Notice that's going to switch your cursor from a little pointing finger to a magnifying glass that doesn't have a plus or minus in it. And that's because rather than clicking with it, which is just going to mess things up, as we're seeing here, and I'll tell you why that is in a moment, you want to press the Control key. Once again, that's the Command key on the Mac, and drag in order to define the image window. And then when you release, you will zoom so the image window fits inside of that marquee. And so if you draw a small marquee like so, then you'll zoom way in. If you draw a bigger marquee, then you'll zoom out. And the reason, by the way, that I mess things up when I Control or Command click is because Photoshop thinks I'm trying to draw a very tiny marquee. So don't do that. Don't Control or Command click. You want to Control or Command drag like so. All right, now there's the obvious stuff down here. For example, you can click on the big mountain icon to zoom in incrementally. You can click the little mountain icon to zoom out incrementally. I think this is why people dismiss this panel, because you can already do that by pressing Control or Command plus or Control or Command minus. Another way to work is to zoom to a custom value just by dragging the slider triangle, at which point you'll see a highly custom value, such as in my case, 63.76%. Or you can dial in your own value just by selecting it and entering 40%, for example. And notice as soon as you press the Enter key, Photoshop goes ahead and assigns that value, so it zooms to 40%, and it deactivates the value as well. If you want the value to stay active, then I'll change it to 42%, let's say, and press Shift-Enter. That's going to be Shift-Return on the Mac. You can also press the up arrow key in order to incrementally raise that value and press Shift-Enter again. And finally, you have this super awesome keyboard trick where you can press the Control key. That's the Command key on the Mac. And notice if I press the Control key or the Command key while my cursor is inside this little field, it changes to a pointing finger, and now I can drag in order to change that value on the fly. Now, the thing about that value right there, which is actually quite useful, is that it's repeated down here in the bottom left corner of the screen. And it works exactly the same way. So I can press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and drag it as well. So right at this point, you may be thinking, You know, Deke, I'm starting to think those other people who are dismissing the Navigator panel are right. There's not really anything you can do inside this panel that's helpful. That's not true. So watch this. I'm going to go ahead and hide the panel for now. And then I'll switch to the full screen mode by pressing Shift F, and then I'll press Control 0 or Command 0 on the Mac to zoom out. All right, now, as I said, I want to zoom in so I'm not seeing any pasteboard, but I'm still seeing the URL. And to make that happen, I'll hover over the right-hand side of the screen to bring back all of my panels, and then I'll click on the little ship's wheel right there to bring up my Navigator panel, and I'll enter a custom zoom value. For example, let's try something like 30%, which isn't all that different from the way it is now. But this is the tricky part. You got to keep your cursor inside the panel. If you accidentally do this number, if you move your cursor slightly outside the panel, all those panels are going to disappear. And so I'll go ahead and hover over the right side of the screen again, and instead of entering a custom value this time, I'll press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and drag like so in order to increase that value until those slivers of pasteboard on the left and right-hand sides of the screen go away, which for me happens at about 36%. Your results are going to vary because you have a higher screen resolution. And then, to dismiss all those panels, you just move your cursor away like so. And now I'll just go ahead and scroll down ever so slightly using the scroll wheel on my mouse so that we can see that entire URL. And that's how you take advantage of the Navigator panel, which is especially useful for establishing a custom zoom ratio in the full screen mode.